Welcome back to Mile High Sports Today. I'm Shawn Drotar. That is Cody Roark on the other side of the screen. And you know what? I was thinking of pointing there, Cody, but let me see here because, it's the stream. I did it. I got to go the opposite of what I'm looking at. There we go. That's Cody Roark, our lead Broncos writers for Mile High Sports. I was thinking it was going to be whatever I was going to do.
I always love the mirrored camera flip.
Right, exactly. But Cody, of course, our Broncos writer for Mile High Sports, host of the Locked On Broncos podcast. You can get that anywhere, of course, in the film room that Cody puts together. Terrific stuff that, quite frankly, during the offseason, if you haven't caught it, nothing's going to change for the Broncos. These things still have to improve and get better. Go catch all those film rooms if you're looking for some offseason viewing. And you're a Broncos fan, check out every single one of them that Cody put together. They're really, really good because even the ones early on where you're talking about a guy like Bo Nix and you see where he needed to work on, you'll be able to see the improvement and understand how it went from point A to point B. So a really good way to look back at this season. But as we do that, Cody, we looked at this divisional round. We looked at what the teams in the playoffs did, and we're seeing a couple things, right? Yes, you have to have dynamic quarterback play. I don't know if the Broncos and Bo Nix have Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but maybe they do have Jaden Daniels, or maybe they do have Jalen Hurts, that kind of quarterback, and they're in the NFC Championship. So the Broncos quarterback position, at least for the moment, seems to be handled, and there's still upside there, and even what you got is pretty darn good. So you like that. But the two consistent things, and really to start with, that the Broncos don't have, that these teams do, and we'll get into the one I think is the least important at the moment, is the wide receiver spot. We did talk about Terry McLaurin. We've talked about some of those guys that are valuable. But it's not as if the Bills are doing it with a bunch of great wide receivers. It's not as if the Chiefs are doing it with a bunch of great wide receivers. You have McLaurin, and of course the Eagles do have some really great receivers. For the Broncos, that's a need. But when you look at the growth that Devon Vele had, when you look at Marvin Mims now being part of the equation, when you look at the growth that Troy Franklin had, I think that the Broncos do need a true number 2 or number 1 receiver. We know in Sean Payton's case, he wants those big-bodied guys. But all of a sudden, I don't think you have to add that much to the room. Because if you get – granted, I know everyone wants T. Higgins. I don't think T. Higgins is going to end up in Denver. But there are guys that can be effective that will be available in free agency that you can plug and play. They might not make Cortland Sutton the 2, but they can be effective. But I look at Sutton, a free agent addition, Vele, Franklin, and Mims. I'm pretty satisfied with that core. I don't think it's as important to add to that as it will be to other parts that we'll get into.
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on there, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. I think the main thing, you either add another wide receiver or you add a pass catching tight end that can maybe make a little bit of a difference for you, right? Obviously, there's some options in the NFL draft. There's the rookie learning curve, or there's a couple veterans that are established a little bit. Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints has been a name that's been talked about, with Saints connections, Cody Rager and that personnel, that admin role here for the Broncos, Pete Carmichael, who knows him very well. And then obviously, I think even a Tommy Tremble might be an option that you can add, but Denver needs to get more from the tight end position than anything. But I'll say this as well, Shawn, I don't even think tight end is probably the biggest priority. It is a priority. I think figuring out your running back situation is probably going to be the most important thing, right? Because you mentioned, like, even with Josh Allen, doesn't have a lot of great wide receivers around him. You look at the Baltimore Ravens, with the injuries that piled up, they didn't have a lot of great pass catching options really around them for Lamar to dole it out to. But you know what those teams have? A strong run game. And look, the Ravens, they were one of the best run defenses in the NFL this season, and Buffalo tore them apart. The Broncos had one of the best run defenses in the NFL this season. The Buffalo Bills tore them apart with the run game, not only with Josh Allen and his legs, but also we talk about James Cook, a guy who's explosive and is an elite level running back for them. And then even like guys like Ty Johnson, like those guys produce more than anything that the Broncos did in the run game this season. Never didn't have a single running back go over 550 yards rushing this season. As a matter of fact, of a large majority of your games that you had this season, Bo Nix was the team's leading rusher.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's not like Bo was running for 100 yards.
I think it was six regular season games and the playoff game.
Yeah, and then Bo literally, here's the thing, like the only game where Bo Nix came close to 100 yards rushing, I think, was the New Orleans Saints game. And that was the Broncos' best rushing output, not only from he, but from Javonte Williams. You got some razzle-dazzle from Jaleel McLaughlin. But the one thing that stood out to me with the Derrick Henrys of the world, the Saquon Barkleys, obviously, of this NFL divisional weekend, and James Cook, you have to have a good running back. You have to have, a good initial guy that can maybe, Sean Payton says they don't bell cows. They're not going to just roll with one. They're going to roll with at least two backs.
Well,
And
that's okay. I mean, we see that across the. You talked about Justice Hill getting the job done behind Derrick Henry. That's okay. But it feels to me like if you're going to add to that, and that's been some of my confusion. I know when we've had Troy Rank on, we've talked about the same thing. That what you need to a certain point is yes, when you have a Saquon Barkley and a Derrick Henry, they're magicians. They're Hall of Famers. That they're special players. But they're both, even though Barkley has a lot of burst and Henry has a lot of wiggle. In the end, they're both power guys. They're hard to bring down. And by the fourth quarter, you're exhausted in bringing those guys down. For Denver, I think you have a speed guy. And
you want to tackle those dudes in cold weather?
Yeah, even James Cook, who was right up there in touchdowns. You don't want to tackle that guy in the fourth quarter. And I think the Broncos, in estimate, the idea they got him was a little surprising he wasn't used that way, but for whatever reason, we'll see. It is worth noting that as a rookie, Marvin Mims never really got to be part of the offense. It didn't work out. This year, about halfway through, it clicked. It's not entirely impossible that it works that way for Estime, who Peyton has consistently said nice things about and likes, and even talked about him.
But benched him for the last.
Pardon me?
But benched him for the playoff game.
Benched him for the playoff game. That part is interesting. But I think you're going to need a guy that can break tackles. The Broncos have not had a 100-yard rusher since Sean Payton has took over. There are some free agents available. Aaron Jones of the Vikings is available. Who knows what the Vikings are going to do? I assume they will probably keep him, move on from Darnold, and make sure you have the best friend there for J.J. McCarthy. But otherwise, the guys are a little long in the tooth. James Conner, an effective player, but I don't know if that's the answer. Najee Harris has had a lot of mileage on those tires, but he is a big guy and a tackle breaker and a guy with a nose for the end zone. Maybe that's a fit.
Jordan Mason,
a bunch of guys that have injury histories. Yeah. Obviously, Nick Chubb's part of that, and trying to figure out
an interesting one to watch.
Pardon me?
Chubb will be an interesting one to watch.
I really like Nick Chubb. I mean, as long as the medicals come back, he's one of those guys that can break tackles and he's agile.
Well, and you're talking about the medicals, but I think this is where you look at, okay, hey, there's guys with injury history, but what have the Broncos done in the last 2 years? They've got a staff that has been incredible with managing injuries, injury prevention, things along those lines. Denver went from worst in the league under Nathaniel Hackett to first in terms of games missed overall. Like, that's a huge jump. Like, when Hackett was here, the Broncos had, I think, over 130 total games missed by players, collectively on the roster. And now you don't have as many season-ending injuries. What was it? Quinn Bailey in training camp, season-ending injury because he broke his ankle. Alex Singleton tore his ACL. I'm trying to remember who – was there another season-ending injury for the Broncos this season, really outside of those two guys? I can't think of it. No, like Tyler Bidet was up in the air because of the scary back injury. We didn't have any clarity on what was going on with him, but obviously he made his return at the end of the season. So for me, it's like – I'd take a flyer on Nick Chubb because of the fact that the Broncos have a great medical staff here that have found ways to, guys who are coming off injury, they look better. They're getting better. They're confident. They're strong. The recovery, they got a nutrition plan. Nick Chubb might just be a little bit of an under-the-radar name to keep an eye on in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I love the ability. The age is still there. There's not as much of the carries on him. And as long as there is a discount involved, the Broncos certainly have money available, about $61 million in free agency. It'll be somewhere around the 8th most in the league. But obviously they have to address that spot too. But yeah, the running back's a major concern. I mean, Bo Nix, 430 rushing yards, tied for the team. Basically, for anybody who had more than 11 carries, that would be Tyler Bidet. For anyone who had more than 11 carries on the season, Nix had the highest yards per carry. He tied for the team lead in touchdowns. And remember, coming into this, his ability to run at the NFL level became something of a surprise. Now, by the end of the year, we took it for granted. But going into the draft and everything else, he can move a little. He's agile in the pocket and can extend the play. That's basically what most people considered. They didn't really think of him as a runner. Obviously, he's got more ability to do that, and the Broncos will use it and can use it. But they've got to augment it there. I mean, when you look at the Broncos running backs, they're not even 1,500 yards combined with everybody there, and 8 total touchdowns. Bo Nix had 4 by himself. I mean, that's a big-time problem. They've got to find the ability to get the running game in a manner in which Sean Payton likes it. Oddly, I look at that running back spot, and I think the only guy that's safe is Jaleel McLaughlin. Yeah. Williams is a free agent. I'd be surprised if he came back. He got the best opportunity he could get. Just didn't really click here. It's probably time to find a new place. I think Estime will make the team, but he's not a given. He's going to have to go into training camp and make it, like a lot of young players. And we'll see. This is one of those spots where I don't want to get too far ahead of the draft, but there are 2 big solutions, and we'll get into the tight end position in a minute. Tyler Warren, a ready-made plug-and-play NFL caliber tight end out of Penn State. And, of course, Ashton Jeanty, who can do all of those things at running back. With the Broncos picking at 20, there is a good chance that one of them will be there, or there's a chance that one of them might be 2 or 3 picks ahead, in which you could slide up and get one. To my mind, when I'm looking at the draft, I'm looking at those 2 guys in particular and thinking, boy, you'd sure like to walk away with one of those in the first round, and it's possible. You don't want to give up too many draft picks to move up and do it. Obviously, there are other needs to address. But you look at those 2 guys sitting there in the draft for Broncos fans, you've got to be salivating a little bit.
I would go with Tyler Warren at this point.
Me too. Warren would be my first choice. I think you can find running backs.
It's hard to justify unless you know beyond a shadow of doubt that running back is going to be something that's going to change your offense entirely. That's going to be a game changer for you. You have no shadow of a doubt about it. That's the only way I would take a running back in round 1. It's hard. It's hard in today's game because, Shawn, as we've seen, the value, the depreciation of running back really outside of the Saquons and the Derrick Henrys of the world here. But that position has just been something that's like, oh, you reach a certain mileage, teams are like, all right, your value is going to go down. We're not going to pay you after a certain.
Cody, even Saquon and Derrick Henry, as valuable as they are, but we talked about their future Hall of Famers. They're on new teams this year.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, normally those guys do not, when you think about that kind of any other position, those guys are not available. A future Hall of Famer who's still got plenty of gas left in the tank, any other position in football, that guy is not leaving. Only at running back do you see those guys shuffle around. And maybe the fact that the success of these 2 guys and what happened to their teams, the instant boost there might change the way the running backs looked at. But for the most part, you're right. It's incredibly devalued in part because there aren't really bell cows anymore. And we know in Sean Payton's case, he could pick Ashton Jeanty, and he's still not going to be a bell cow in Denver. He'll still use a group.
Yeah, and I think Shawn's preference is to not necessarily use 3, but to find a way to just consistently use 2 guys. I think that's
Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara vibe.
You look at even like Reggie Bush, Deuce McAllister. You look at Latavius Murray, Alvin Kamara. Where his offenses have had success have primarily been with 2 running backs. And of course, they use Taysom Hill. When Drew Brees had the injury, Taysom Hill took over as starter. Heck, we saw it in Denver, how Taysom at quarterback used his legs to be able to produce in the run game. You saw it with Latavius Murray running for 100 and something yards against Denver and 2 touchdowns, against Vic Fangio's defense all the way back. I think that was in 2020. I think it was the COVID season where that happened. But for me, I look at where things are at collectively, and it's like Denver needs to find an identity in our game. And here's the thing. You and I have talked about this too. From a scheme standpoint, the one thing I noticed with Baltimore, thing I noticed with Detroit, I've noticed it with Philadelphia, Buffalo, they pull their offensive linemen to have variance in their run game. Sure, there's times where they're straight zone blocking, and they're doubling and getting to the next level. But then there's times where they're pulling the guard, they're pulling guard center, they're pulling the tackle to be able to open things up in the run game. Denver doesn't do that consistently. They don't really do that at all, to be honest with you. Their large body work, they don't do that. It's just simple zone blocking scheme, double team, work your way up and hope that your running back sees the hole. When your running backs aren't seeing the hole consistently, or teams are saying, hey, we know how to stop it, then that's a problem. It makes your offense one-dimensional. So that's where Sean Payton and this offense, they're going to have to evolve here this season. Do you adapt the scheme, or do you not necessarily adapt, but do you evolve in your scheme, right? Okay, hey, we got this. The offensive line's intact. Now, what can we add to it that's going to make things better for the back end, right? Because Bo Nix just can't be your offense by himself. That was the thing. Bo Nix was the Broncos offense this season. And while that's good news that, hey, the Broncos have found their franchise guy, you do that to a young quarterback, you're going to run him into the ground sooner rather than later. You can't do that.
Yeah. And it is interesting to get to talk about that idea because Sean Payton is, let's face it, more or less just taking his New Orleans Saints playbook and bringing it to Denver and expecting to find players that fit it. But there is sort of a lack of creativity there. And especially, you're right, when you're looking at the teams that are still out there, the innovation in the running game for Sean Payton, it's just not there yet. And this is the spot. It's interesting. Sean Payton is 60. Sean Payton's been in this league a long time. He's top 20 all time in wins. One of the things to keep in mind, and I think he's done a brilliant job, is that better coaches than Sean Payton, Bill Walsh, Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, Don Shula, eventually. But eventually the things you do don't work anymore. Sometimes these coaches can reinvent themselves. Andy Reid's been one of those that's been really good at reinventing himself. Mike Tomlin reinvents himself every single year, and it keeps the Steelers in the playoffs with teams that don't belong in the playoffs. But some of these coaches also don't evolve, and it starts the decline of when they eventually end out of the game. Yeah. And I think for Sean Payton in the running game, what you're pointing out there, for all the positives that the Broncos season has gone and all the things you like about what Sean Payton has done, that's the canary in the coal mine to me. That if Sean Payton can't or won't evolve the way he approaches the running game, there's a concern that maybe this is all the tricks that Sean Payton has, and if that's the case, the league's going to start sniffing it out. That's not an answer for right now because we don't know. But Sean Payton's going to have to, as he said it himself, right? Confidence is proven ability. He's going to have to prove the ability to adapt and adjust this running game. Otherwise, there is no confidence in Broncos fans that it's going to change no matter who's there behind it. That's one of the big concerns. And I think in the running game, the point you're making is a really important one, Cody, because the running backs could be better. They could. But still, you could put better running backs in that running scheme. There's not a lot of creativity. It's easy to defend against comparatively. If you don't have a guy like a Derrick Henry, who's a tackle-breaking machine who can compensate for that, you're in trouble. And so, yes, you need better playmakers in that position. But a lot of the coaching is going to be involved in making the running game better more than, say, the tight end position or the wide receiver position.
Yeah, and I think so much of these, they're all intertwined, right? I mean, you talk about, offense being 11 guys there. Okay, hey, do you have a quarterback in place? That's usually one of the more important foundational things you have. Okay, you got that. You got the offensive line. Yeah, you got the offensive line in place. Okay, now how do you continue building that? Do you have the playmakers around there sustainable that can elevate, your quarterback or can help your quarterback out? You have some guys there. But does your coaching complement all of that, right? Because it's not necessarily, and we always talk about this, obviously the coaches have to set the standard and the coaches set the pace for what the season and what your scheme and what everything's going to be like. But even coaches have to adapt at some point. Let's say, okay, hey, I'm doing too much of this. It's not working. How can I adjust to this? And I think that's something that the coaching staff certainly is going back. That's why, like, when the season ends, Shawn, these guys take a 2-week break. They reflect on some things, and then they come back together and meet. We've already seen one coaching staff change here for the Broncos, the special teams coordinator. There could be some more coaching changes coming in terms of position coaches. So we'll obviously keep our eye on that. MileHighSports.com will update you if that ever does happen there. But you have to be reflective on it, and you obviously have to adapt. And I think even the fan base, a large portion of the responses that I got throughout this season, and especially after the playoff game against the Bills, a lot of fans said, we want to see Sean Payton adapt. We got to see him be better and more consistent in terms of play calling, sticking with something if it's working, not abandoning something if it's not working right away, right? There's got to be a fine line of saying, hey, okay, the run game's not working. Here's what we can do to offset that. Or, hey, the passing game's not working, or this concept's not working. What can we do to help offset that? I think at some point, like Shawn, and he hyperanalyzes a lot of information, and it's hard to be a play caller. But there are times where Shawn will either give up on something too quickly or he'll stick with something a little too long. And you just got to find the fine line there. And I think if he can master that, which, look, Shawn's been doing this a long time. He doesn't need me to tell him anything. He's going to, and I'm not going to tell Shawn how to do his job. Shawn's got, knows more about football. He's forgotten more about football than I can ever know. But you have to be able to continue to evolve, as you said, because, these younger coaches are taking over the game. The game is constantly changing. How are you getting with the times, so to speak? And I think that's going to be something we'll maybe see play out here. I think 2025 is going to be big for the Broncos, going to be big for Sean Payton in this regard. Those are some of the things that we learned. I also learned this as well. I mean, Shawn, I think when you look at what some of these other teams were able to do in the NFL divisional playoffs, look, you have to have that. I think shifting gears from the offense to the defense, we talked about guys like Jalen Carter. The Broncos have upgraded their trenches, and certainly I think that's going to be an area of emphasis. I feel like one of the bigger takeaways, you need a rangy, athletic, sideline-to-sideline linebacker that can maybe change, the course of how you're doing. When you are playing these mobile, athletic quarterbacks, like Matt Milano, thought he did a terrific job being the spy to Bo Nix in that wild card round. Then you watch Matt Milano play against the Baltimore Ravens, arguably the best player on the field for them defensively in terms of just how he is. You need a guy who can obviously read the guard and say, hey, this is run. I'm filling my run gap right away, and he's getting tackles. but you also need another run. You need a linebacker who can not only tackle and stop. That's something that Sean Payton wants, but you need a linebacker that, oh, it's a pass. I've got to get depth between 5 to 20 yards in certain situations, certain coverage calls. I got to do it like that. And then I got to be able to get from one part of the sideline to the next in terms of pursuit. Denver doesn't have a linebacker like that. And look, you got Alex Singleton coming off of an ACL injury. The one guy I would say in-house that maybe you can turn into this player, maybe Drew Sanders at this point. But that's also a challenge. Here's why. You moved him to edge rusher, so he bulked up. And obviously when he's going through his Achilles recovery, he's jacked. He is a brick shit house when you look at just like how loaded he is, his upper body, his shoulders, and his arms. So can you turn him into that, right? Can you get him fast enough coming off the Achilles to be able to do that? Or do you say, hey, we think he's just a run-stopping guy, and then you go out there and you get a guy? Like your in-house option, I think the best option at this point for a spy-like prototype at linebacker is Drew Sanders.
And the funny thing is, I think the Broncos have made a mistake about this in the last couple of years, and I've harped on it on this show. But they took Drew Sanders, who's a rangy guy, big speed for his position out at all the combine and pre-draft testing, and then they put him to the outside. They did the same the year before with Baron Browning, who as a rookie was outstanding on the inside and looked like you found your kind of a absolute stalwart guy in the middle of the defense who could do that sort of thing, who had the big time speed, sideline to sideline, could play tight ends. What the Broncos do? More edge rushers. They wanted to keep piling everybody who were edge rushers. Anyone who had speed, which now you're talking about, and I agree with you, with modern tight ends and everything, you need speed in the middle linebacker position. And the Broncos had taken anybody with speed for multiple years and moved them to the outside. And as you pointed out, there's an adjustment physically in the move you make now. So you lose some of the speed, you add some of the muscle. But I look at it and think if they hadn't moved Baron Browning, if they hadn't moved Drew Sanders, Sanders got hurt. But we're not even talking about the Baron Browning trade when Nick Bonito started to get his traction, because Baron Browning would be that guy sideline to sideline. We knew about his tackle ability. You could bring him on the blitz here and there. Yeah. The Broncos themselves seem to not value that position in the way that you and I value it, in the way that you and I think it should be. I agree, because I think they've been exposed, and I think you see the teams that are succeeding, they have to have one. And the quarterbacks who they've had the biggest trouble with, mobile ones, whether it's, and not just Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, guys like Justin Herbert, mobile. Yeah. So they've got to fix that. But that's another thing. Do the Broncos value that? We say they need it. We see they need it, but they don't listen to us. Are they willing to probably look at it and say, that is what we need. We need to adjust. We need to go find a rangy sideline to sideline guy. We need to see if we can move Sanders back, or maybe, who knows, he's a free agent. Maybe go grab Baron Browning back again and see if you want to move him to the inside. But obviously for the Broncos, this is one of those things that we don't know that if they value it necessarily. Singleton's not that guy. Cody Barton is a little more speedy than Singleton. I like what he did for the Broncos, but even before Singleton got hurt, it was Singleton and Barton in the middle. So the Broncos don't seem to actually have as much interest in that position on linebacker as you and I think they should.
I think it's changing. I think that's something that they are probably going to prioritize, because I think one thing as you're watching these games, look, it's not even just the Matt Milanos. Like Alex Anzalone is such a difference maker for the Detroit Lions. Fred Warner for the San Francisco 49ers. Those guys don't come around very often in terms of that, but if you have specific traits, you can do, a lot of those things. And Drew Sanders does, I think, have some of those traits, but it's like, all right, can you get him grounded to the mental aspect of it? Because, okay, he started off as an off-ball linebacker. You moved him to edge rusher. Then he suffered an injury. Then you moved him back to off-ball linebacker. Like, there was a process that, is going to take place there. And obviously Drew's a very high football IQ. He's a smart player. So it's like, can you do that? And can you find another guy? Like the Bills have two of those guys. They got Terrell Bernard and they got freaking Matt Milano. And I think that's going to be a dynamic. That's where I think that they're going to have the advantage. Even Kansas City's inside linebacking group is pretty dang good here.
Oh, yeah.
So for me, it's like you just need one guy, right? One guy that has that ability, and then you can plug and play a guy who can be a run stuffer, elsewhere. You don't necessarily need another guy to be a legit cover guy. You just need a guy who can cover from time to time. That's where I think the Broncos have to have their focus on. To be honest with you, I think that's more of a problem for them than it was the safety play this year. I thought Brandon Jones played terrific. Sure. I thought P.J. Locke caught some flack at the end of the year from the fan base because, look, P.J. was having to do a little bit more because of what was happening with the linebackers. And so when P.J.'s there, or there's a play being made against P.J., it's not necessarily on P.J., it's on the fact that there were some issues at inside linebacker that plagued them at the end of the season. That was a huge difference maker outside of the Levi Wallace game.
Can I give you my my sleeper there? You picked about Nick Chubb, a guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how interested the Broncos are, but I look at that player. Actually, was a free agent last year on a 1-year deal. I would look at it again. I think for the Broncos, I really like Kazir White, who signed with the Cardinals, played this year.
Okay.
A guy that's got big time speed and coverage skills, and I think somebody like that for the Broncos, without breaking the bank, might be a good value add for someone for a team like Denver. Well, let's go to the big one, the tight end spot. Obviously, Broncos fans are looking, visions of Tyler Warren in their head, or maybe even Colston Loveland from Michigan as the consolation prize. But you mentioned some guys as well. But I mean, the Broncos tight end was just a disaster position. 51 catches, 483 receiving yards total. That's not a guy. That's everybody who played linebacker on the Denver Broncos combined could not get to 500 total receiving yards. Travis Kelce had 117, on this weekend. So I mean, that's terrible. 5 touchdowns, that's fine, I guess, but you're still talking about less than 500 yards from the total tight end position. That's a disaster. You talked about a guy that might break out in training camp. Maybe he did. Lucas Kroll, your trivia question of the offseason, led all Broncos tight ends in receptions with 19.
Jeez,
that's a nightmare.
Yeah, and it wasn't nearly. I don't think he even had close as much yardage as Adam Troutman did.
He did not. Troutman didn't even have 200, and he was the leading receiver in yards. I mean, there is good tight end play.
Yeah.
There is average tight end play. There is bad tight end play, and there is whatever the Denver Broncos are doing.
And it seemed like the Broncos, they were heavy 12 and 13 personnel this year, and primarily trying to run the ball out of it, or just have extra guys in pass protection.
With not a lot of success running either.
So, Shawn, you're telling me this, Kate. The Broncos had 0 effective run game this season, and they had 0 effective tight end play. You take away 2 outlets on the offense there, and it's like it's Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton. It's Bo Nix and Marvin Mims. That's not sustainable. And it's like I think the Broncos realize that, but how do they attack that this offseason? I agree. Look, and if you had to choose between adding another playmaking wide receiver, right, that would help. But I do think you need to have young guys that are developing in a great fashion. Troy Franklin, Vele, as you mentioned, Marvin Mims taking another step forward here. To me, you got to add a tight end. Like if that's a priority, I think it goes running back, tight end, and then if you want to add a receiver, absolutely find a way to do it. But I think it goes tight end and running back as the main 2 1A, 1B priorities for this team to add to in the offseason, because that's going to help out Bo Nix. That's going to help out Sean Payton. It's going to make it to where your offense is less one-dimensional. And look, I think this remains to be true here about this team. In 2023, the Broncos offense was terrible on third down. They were terrible in the red zone. That was an area emphasis Sean Payton said we need to improve, and of course they did. They became a top 10 scoring offense this year without a run game, without good tight ends. And it tells me you add a good running back and you have a good run game there. You add a tight end who can also be a little security outlet for your quarterback. This Denver offense will be drastically better next season if they can do those 2 things.
Yeah, I would argue a smidge. I think we're on the same page. To me, tight end is the clear number 1 addition, and that's in part because they're harder to find. If there's any, you go look in college football, and the position where you can find the most guys by far is wide receiver. Wide receivers all but grow on trees in the college ranks. You can scout well. You can find receivers that can help you. Obviously, it's something you'll probably have to spend on in free agency if you want to make a big jump. But I'm less worried about adding that to the room. The tight end spot, however, is very different. The top ones do not hit free agency. Obviously, you're talking about needing to draft one, and you might have to move up. There are 2 good options in this one. Tyler Warren might be really special, maybe not Brock Bowers special, but maybe pretty close to it. And Colston Loveland, not that level of guy, but for the Broncos would instantly become their best guy by a wide margin. And so I think when you're picking instant starters, I think the tight end role is tougher. You can find running backs, I think, throughout the draft. And you talked about him when Sean Payton was successful with New Orleans. They took, Reggie Bush and Deuce McAllister and Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara and Pierre Thomas during their Super Bowl run. I mean, Bush is obviously the biggest name in that because he was picked, I believe, 5th overall. But for the most part, you can find those running backs. So because there is an opportunity to find running backs and wide receivers, to me, there are 2 and a number 3, but you have to find at least just an NFL caliber tight end who can do all of the things an NFL tight end is supposed to do. To me, there's that, and then there's everything else.
Yeah, and look, the number one thing too as well is like, all right, are they a fit for the offense or the defense? And are they a good fit for the locker room? One thing that Sean Payton said, and I'll say this, I think the culture inside the Broncos locker room is very strong. One thing that Sean Payton said is like, when we meet and we discuss bringing in players, whether it's free agency, whether it's the NFL draft, we owe it to the locker room to bring in guys that won't tear that culture apart, that those guys are either going to be part of it or not. And I thought even CEO Greg Penner said something very interesting. Like, this team doesn't have a lot of prima donnas. He says, if you're a prima donna, you're not going to do well here because that's not.
You tell me the Broncos aren't going to trade for Tyreek Hill?
No, they ain't going to do that. Like, as terrific of a player as he is, I don't think he would be the guy that you need from a culture standpoint.
Yeah.
And look, I think so much of it, you look at Buffalo, great culture. You look at Baltimore, great culture. Kansas City, great culture. There's no prima donnas on those teams necessarily. And that's something I think that stands out. I would say the only prima donna that's, on a playoff team in the Final Four, probably Austin Eckler. He's a prima donna. Not a very good guy, not very well liked in the locker room by a handful of players and a lot of people. So I would say in most cases, not having prima donnas is a sign of like, hey, you can get there. Look what happened with the Green Bay Packers. You had some prima donnas in that locker room. You had guys falling apart. The team culture there wasn't great, and that things sputtered out. And when they lost, at the end of the year, you had guys not want to talk to anybody. And that right there, I think, is like, how can you improve the culture? Sean Payton's done that, but more, it's a testament to Sean Payton creating an environment that allows players to take control of that. New voices, younger voices being able to emerge. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, Denver, they're in a very good spot. So I think that's also going to be an important element to watch here this offseason.
There are lessons to be learned from these divisional rounds for Broncos fans. Obviously, the championship games coming up on Sunday. There'll be more lessons to be learned there because you'll see a lot of tight ends, a lot of good running game, a lot of good wide receivers, a lot of things the Denver Broncos need and do not yet have. So for them to reach that level, to be where they want to be, they're going to have to get those things. So even just enjoying the football game with the best teams and watching them go from that perspective, there are things that are educational for Broncos fans that you can pull away from that as well. And of course, free agency for the Broncos will come quicker than you'd think. Actually, it's not all that long. It's actually just about 7 weeks from now, believe it or not, we'll be at free agency. So, it comes pretty quick. So you want to make sure you follow Cody Roark for all of it. Make sure you're paying attention to everything he's putting together at Mile High Sports. Check out the Locked On Broncos podcast as well. And catch up on all those film rooms. We'll have a chance to talk more with Cody next week. And when we do, we'll start breaking down the Broncos free agents. Of course, it's great to have that $61 million, but some of it has to go to your guys and not all of them necessarily your free agents as well. Remember, Nick Bonito, Zach Allen, maybe Cortland Sutton, all need contract extensions too. So there is a lot of
salary cap space if you extend those guys.
Yeah, it goes quick, right? You can't just blow the budget all in one place. But we'll have a chance to talk about that at a later time. But in the meantime, that'll do it for us at Mile High Sports today. Thank you, Cody. Thanks for everybody who putting this together. Danilo Piro sitting in for Danny Bailey today. Feel better, Danny. And Danilo's taking care of it, so we really appreciate it. For Cody and everyone at Mile High Sports, I'm Shawn Drotar. Thanks for catching Mile High Sports today.